Welcome to part one of the two-part series, Building Blocks for an Effective Program. I'm Susan Jones, Department Director of the Youth and Family Services Department of the United Arc. Our Positive Parenting Program provides services to parents with intellectual and developmental disabilities as well as functional limitations. It's one of the programs within that department. I have had the privilege for the last 35 years through my work at the United Arc to support parents living with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The Positive Parenting Program is one of the longest running programs not only in Massachusetts, but also in the United States, along with another long running program, Communitas, also from Massachusetts, and will be partnering with us today. Cumulatively, the presenters and myself figured out we had 90 years of experience between us, and we're very happy to be sharing part of that today. Thanks to the United Arc of thanks to the Arc of Mass for hosting this webinar and providing technical support. Carrie Mahoney will now give us some instructions. Carrie Mahoney, there she is.
Yep. Hi, I just had to unmute myself. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for jumping on today. I'm really excited to be able to help offer this. So just a couple of tips. I am available in the chat if you have any questions or having any issues at all. The other thing is, if you're having any problems with your audio or seeing the presentation, really the best strategy is to jump off and jump back on. That usually takes care of any issues. You've all been muted upon entry, and that's because we're recording this session for people who would like to hear it again, view it again, and also those who couldn't make today. So it makes for a much better quality recording when everybody is muted. So thank you. Please use the chat box. We've got a really big group today, which is so exciting. If you have any questions for any of the speakers, please make sure that you just chat them in. And at the end of the presentation, we're going to have time to discuss those. You're also all going to receive a copy of the handouts and PowerPoint at the end of the session. And the other just thing to tell you is that we have an evaluation that you will be rerouted to at the end of the session, and we really appreciate your feedback. So thank you. Take it away, Sue.
Thanks, Carrie. I think we can move to the next slide. Okay, well, I'll just continue on until we can get that next slide up. Oh, there it is. This webinar series is a partnership between the Department of Developmental Services, who 24 years ago this month sponsored the first A Chance to Parent conference. The conference was dedicated to supporting parents and professionals to support them and beginning to look at how we could best serve families. Department of Children and Families has been funding specialized support groups for parents with ID since 2000. The Children's Trust started funding parenting groups for parents with ID starting in 1998. Arc of Mass assisted in writing the Arc of the U.S.'s position paper on parents with intellectual disabilities, as well as provided the United Arc seed money for the first and still only existing transitional supported living program. Communitas and the United Arc have also been on the work group, and we continue to receive funding and supports from these state agencies. Our work group, as you may know, was planning to do a workshop at Holy Cross prior to COVID-19. We felt that we needed to move forward and decided to use this format. I'm pleased to announce, though, we now have a new formalized official name, Statewide Massachusetts Partnership for Supporting Parents with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, with the goal being enhance the system's capacity and competence in supporting parents living with ID and DD across the Commonwealth. Part one of our Part 2 series will be an overview of history and research, which is the foundation for the development of the last topic, strategies. Each of these topics areas alone could be a full day presentation. Next, I'd like to introduce the presenters for today's webinar. Again, I'm Sue Jones and will be facilitating. Judy SantaMaria will be talking about history. Paula Thompson will be talking about research. Betsy Misch will be talking about strategies. Next slide. The objectives for the workshop are to gain an understanding of historical context with this population, to learn about research related to best practices, to develop a knowledge of successful support strategies. Thank you. Next slide. The first topic area is history. It's important to know where we've been and how that history has impacted the individuals we serve, as well as the service system and society's perceptions of parents with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Looking at history will help us determine how we can move forward in our evolving practice, setting realistic expectations, perceptions, and providing services to support parents. Judy SantaMaria, our presenter for the history topic, has over 23 years of experience providing services to parents, facilitating parent education groups, and developed a successful parenting program. She's the Director of Family Support for Communitas. Judy?
Thanks, Sue. As Sue just introduced me, I'm Judy SantaMaria. I'm the Director of Family Support at Communitas. And I'm proud to say that I've been providing supports for parents with intellectual and developmental disabilities for 23 years. I'm excited to begin our presentation on parents with intellectual and developmental disabilities with a brief history of disability rights. This history provides the groundwork for today's workshop as well as the next. And we'll tell you about services and supports for families with intellectual disabilities. The first 50 years includes a really dark history, including segregation, institutionalization, eugenics, and a Supreme Court decision condoning sterilization without consent. We move on to the next 50 years, which starts with deinstitutionalization. Carrie, you're ahead of me, but that's okay. Which started our movement for change, recognition of parents with intellectual disabilities, and advocacy. So the 1920s, historically, adults with disabilities and adults with mental health issues were segregated from the rest of society. They were further segregated by gender to prevent sexual activity and any opportunities for procreation. My poll question is, have you ever worked with someone who lived in an institution? Well, I started in the field in the 1990s, actually working with Carrie, but working with Families Organizing for Change on an innovation project called Building Community Bridges. It was a project to provide just a little bit more family support for a number of families. And I was given a very small caseload, probably under 5 families, including two families with intellectual disabilities. One of the families was headed by a gentleman by the name of Dave. He had grown up in the Fernald School and went on to live in the community through deinstitutionalization and met his wife while working in a plastics factory. They made straws. They later had 2 sons. The oldest has severe intellectual and developmental disabilities, global delays. And his youngest son is typically developing and now works in the community. I see him often. Dave never talked about the institution except every so often. And he did mention that his father dropped off, he and his siblings, because his mother was a drinker and she was fast. Well, I learned so much from Dave and his family. I learned about respect, learned about courage. I learned to recognize strengths before I was looking for weaknesses. And I learned to schedule my appointments at halfway through Gunsmoke instead of 11:30. He taught me so much. So I also want to say that Dave was one of the fiercest and most courageous advocates that I have ever met, and also one of the most respected. His oldest son was placed in a residential school at the age of 15. And many of you know the process of looking for residential schools. But I was lucky enough to go with Dave, and he introduced himself to everyone he met, explained that he had grown up in the Fernald School, and explained that it was so very important to him that what had happened to him would not happen to his son. Dave's oldest son was placed in a residential school, was very successful, and now lives in the community. Dave has now retired, and he also lives in the community and is driving his wife nuts. Next slide. This is the Supreme Court decision of 1927, Buck versus Bell. In the 1880s, there was a strong eugenics movement. The goal of the eugenics movement was to provide a superior race through selective breeding. The Buck versus Bell decision says that states, they adopted forced eugenics or sterilization of people with developmental disabilities against their will and consent. And this decision has never been overturned. Carrie Buck was a 17-year-old who allegedly had intellectual disabilities and was raised by a foster parent. Her mother also was allegedly had intellectual disability. Carrie grew up in a foster home and was raped by their nephew. She gave birth to a daughter. In 1924, she was committed to Virginia's state colony for epileptics and the feeble-minded and ordered sterilized. Justice Holmes made the decision in 1927 following the eugenics movement. And the eugenics statement was that people with intellectual disabilities are unfit as parents, their children will be unfit, and that they and their children are drains on society. The society, as a result, may impose sterilization on them without consent. This next video clip further demonstrates the use of sterilization without consent, sorry. Can you play that, Carrie?
Willis Cleveland Lynch, born in 1933, June the 30th. I'm 79, I'll be 80 years old my next birthday. Don't even feel like 80. I was sterilized in 1948 when I was 14 years old. They did a whole lot of, I think it was 7,500 of us, in North Carolina that they did it to. And what it did, something, that God put there, they took away, I want to understand why, Because I love kids, I get a kick out of them. It's in the back of your mind what it done to you. Something that they can't correct, They shouldn't be cutting with somebody, that for no reason, that I don't see what purpose of it anyway they did it for. I never know. But it was wrong for what they done. I didn't know what was going on. If I did, I wouldn't be singing to that nurse. She put the mask on my face, after I sung, too, and all that mess, And I got out of bed the next day, knew something was wrong when I stooped over, I couldn't straighten up, They didn't tell me nothing about how the operation going to affect me or whatever, They didn't say nothing about nothing like that. They just took me and cut me like a hog. Well, can you ride some more? I love to ride. I would say about 7, 8 years ago, all this right here in Raleigh started, and I decided to go in and get my original papers, about the operation and everything. And that's where I found out, that Mama had to sign to get the operation for me. They wanted to sterilize her, not me. It was in writing the papers that I got. But they decided to do me that way instead of her. Like I say, you just like to have some kids of your own, You think about what they done done, you can't have none. It ain't nothing like having some of your own, if you love kids like I do.
Next slide. Thanks, Carrie. Okay, so we're going to leave the dark history and start talking about what got us where we are today. 1970s, deinstitutionalization and living in the community. People began leaving institutions and began living in the community. Core principles of deinstitutionalization of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have the right to live in community and to receive necessary services and supports. And life in the community will have dignity, freedom of choice, and a sense of history. There were two results. Well, of course, people started living together, having intimate relationships, married, and had children. But there was also increased victimization, and from victimization came pregnancies. Next slide, please. In 1990, the Americans with Disability Act was passed. Under the American with Disabilities Act, states must provide individualized assessment of parental capacity, reasonable accommodations and services. This includes adjustment to timeframes, visitation structures, and instructional methods. Failures to provide these accommodations may result in a violation of the ADA. The ADA is one of our most comprehensive pieces of civil rights legislation. It prohibits discrimination and guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunity as everybody else living in the mainstream United States. This is one of our most important civil rights acts. Could you play this video, Carrie?
I mean, I remember when we were trying to get the ADA passed, and I need to climb the steps. I want to climb the steps, and Wade said, "Go for it." So I got out of my wheelchair and I started climbing. Well, the next thing I know, I've got 50 cameras on me, and I've got mics all over me, and it's like the hottest day, you know, the month of March, and I'm just, I mean, I'll take all night if I have to. And I'm like, you know, I'm 8, 9 years old, and I'm going, water, 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 I need water. And, you know, I've got the little pamphlet in the back of my pocket that we're supposed to hand over to the politicians to get the ADA passed, and they say that it was the image of me climbing those steps that you know, was the final decision to get the ADA passed. And I mean, I had to do it.
Next slide, please. The ADA is not a bad place to be stuck. Okay, 1999, the Olmstead Act. The Olmstead Act is another very important piece of civil rights legislation. It requires that people with disability live in a least restrictive environment. The background of the Olmstead Act is that 2 women were living in Georgia, and they were diagnosed with mental health disabilities. And they were living in a community, but in order to receive any services, they had to go back and forth to an institution. They went back and forth over a dozen times. The 2 women petitioned the state of Georgia to receive their services in the community. And a decision was made that the 2 women and everyone else has the right to receive state-funded services and supports in a community rather than an institution. There's a 3-part test to the Olmstead Act. The first being that the treatment professionals must determine that community supports are appropriate. The second, and most important, I think, is that the person does not object to living in the community. And the third is that providing services in the community would be a reasonable accommodation. Next. Okay, here we go. 2006, the UN Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Article 23 of the UN Convention of Rights of Persons with Disabilities outlines the rights of individual disabilities to become parents and states that a child shall not be removed from a family due to parental disability. Every effort should be made to keep the family intact. This again sets the groundwork for our work with parents with disabilities. Next slide, please. Okay, so rocking the cradle. This is 2012, rocking the cradle. I just lost, I lost the Zoom, but I'm going to keep going. National Council of Disabilities report observed that parents with intellectual and developmental disabilities face serious risks with respect to continued custody over their children. They called on the states and the federal government to pay attention to protections given to family life under the UN Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. They called on eliminating discrimination against people with disabilities in matters of marriage, family, parenthood, and relationships. And the people with disabilities should be on equal basis with others. And that states should render the appropriate assistance in the performance of child rearing responsibilities. This is the next and final slide. I can't see. Okay. So my final slide is on the Gordon case. The Gordon case is going to bring us closer to home as we close out this section. In 2015, Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice informed the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that we were violating the ADA for failure to incorporate reasonable modifications into services provided for parents with intellectual disabilities. This case involves Sarah Gordon. Sarah Gordon was a 21-year-old woman with intellectual and developmental disabilities. 2 days after delivering her daughter in the hospital, the baby was removed. Sarah lived with her parents, and her parents had planned to help her raise their child. Her mother had already quit work. So the decision states that DCF overly relied on IQ and diagnosis and denied Sarah the opportunity to participate on the benefit from DCF programs, services, and activities on the basis of the disability. They stated that disability is a condition and not a number, and that we need to tailor evaluation and services to the needs of the parent. Although we have been providing services for over 20 years, the Gordon case has had quite an impact as many courts and justices, as well as DCF, is very much aware of the services that we need to provide for parents with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It has taken us a long way. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Yep. Well, I'm just going to pipe in, Sue. I just wanted to report out about the question. Have you ever worked with a person from who was in an institution? And actually, I want to say the majority of the group has not. So some people have, but you know, most people chatted in no.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Our next topic area is going to be research. Paula Thompson is an LICSW and is also from Communitas and has provided multiple services within her 10 years as a program specialist. She has a variety of experience supporting parents and facilitates support groups such as healthy relationships and provides in-home supports. Back when many of us were first started, there was very little research available for us to rely on. So I'm very excited that Paula will be sharing with us some of the newest research information. Paula?
Thanks so much, Sue. Yes, so there has been a lot of research done in the last 10 years compared to the 10 years before that. And so I'm excited to be able to share that with you today. As Sue mentioned, I work as part of the Family Support Center at Communitas. And one of the aspects that we do in addition to supporting families who have family members with disabilities is our small successful parenting program, where we're able to help teach some parenting skills on a one-on-one basis within 5 area offices in the Northeast region. Next. So there is a lack of supporting of programming in the United States. Massachusetts is not alone. Many states see that parents with intellectual disabilities cannot learn, but we will learn later in the research that that is not the case. There are options such as kinship placement with family members, adult family foster care, where maybe the parent with the intellectual disability receives some coaching in addition to that of the child, as well as grandparents as a natural support. More internationally, what they do for parents with disabilities is that they put in the supports from the beginning and don't necessarily wait for something to occur. But they put the supports in knowing that they'll be needed, and it's not as much of a kind of a deficit-based program. And much of the research points to what Judy just talked about with the ADA and the United Nations documents. Next. So the guardianship process for people living with intellectual disabilities. In the disability world, we talk a lot about guardianship and what is the process and can people make informed decisions. And one of the things that the research points to is that, like guardianship, where there can be full guardianship, where somebody needs help in all aspects of their life, there can also be limited guardianship or supported parenting. So looking at an area where parents need support and how they can get that support. And I think it helps in some ways. The guardianship is already a legal process, and so we can take that aspect of the legal process and apply it to parents with intellectual disabilities. One of the things that you will probably hear me say over and over again that the research states in a variety of different ways is it doesn't have to be an all or nothing process, nor should it be an all or nothing process for parents. There can be limited parental rights. Maybe somebody is able to go to school meetings, but somebody else operates and makes the educational decisions on their behalf. We have an example of that that occurs in our Family Support Center on an annual basis. Really important to not go with the all or nothing approach. Also, I think about a person that I just finished working with who's going to share guardianship with her sister. Her children have been with her sister for over a year and are super successful. She's still working on stabilizing herself, and so they're going to share guardianship. And so this will be the most stable environment for her children while also providing her some access. Then the research talks about supported parenting and how can we support different parents. One of the examples I think of here when I was reading the research was a family group conference that I participated in, where everybody took a different responsibility each day, but the main responsibilities fell on a neighbor who lived upstairs, as well as the foster parent who was readily available, ensuring that this parent always had somebody to call, no matter what time of day it was, and whether or not her formal services were in place. The dignity of risk is something else that is discussed in the research and always discussed in the disability community. The ability to make bad choices. Everybody has made a decision that they didn't love at one time or another, and the research takes a look at how does that play out in child welfare. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes as well. And as Judy touched on during her section, the parenting is not the only aspect where people with disabilities experience discrimination. It's also in the education system at times, through employment, through housing, and many other aspects of our society. Next. External factors play a role, not only the intellectual disability. So the research shows that it is other risk factors other than IQ that determine whether or not a parent is going to be able to successfully parent their child. So these risk factors can include things like strength of the family of origin. Did they learn parenting techniques growing up, or did they grow up in the system? Poverty concerns, concerns around kids getting food. I hear that is often a concern. It's pretty concrete. Kids need to eat and parents need to be able to provide it for them. I think about some of the families that I've worked with, and one mom in particular who during an hour-long supervised visit wanted to save some for later, save some formula for later. She didn't understand why her infant daughter needed to drink all of the formula. And after many conversations, she often said that she saves food for later because there might not be enough food. And so we talked about how her child would be going back to the foster home and would have enough food. So oftentimes it's just really figuring out what the parent means. Also, risk factors might be things like education. Were they able to complete school? What was school like for them? Is learning something that they feel successful with, or did they feel like they always failed? And that it affects the work that we do. And Betsy's going to talk a lot about that in the next segment. Self-esteem is an issue. Did they pick somebody who would be a partner that would support them and their various abilities, as well as mental health and substance abuse. But we know that all of these external factors play a much greater role than their IQ number. Next. Is love and slow and steady progress enough? This is a question that we often discuss or comes up with many families, the question of good enough parenting. We know that approximately 80% of parents with intellectual disabilities have their children removed at one point or another. They did everything they were supposed to do, but can't do it independently. And so the research states the importance of long-term supports. And what does that look like? How do we help families keep up with their milestones? And there's also a need for specific strategies to that person. Just like all people, you can't say that all people with intellectual disabilities learn this one way. Looking at their strengths, as we'll do in section 2 in 2 weeks, is a key to making sure they're successful. And that's noted in the research as well. There was also some note in the research about lack of increase of visitation. So if we know that parents with intellectual disabilities learn slower, and it might take them a little bit longer, not that they can't learn, but it's just going to take a little bit longer. Perhaps an hour of a visit is not long enough. Maybe they could have visits twice a week so that they can really build their skills. It would be hard for any parent to learn parenting skills in an hour a week. There again, research states no consensus that parents with intellectual disability relate to poor child outcomes. And we're going to talk about this in section 2 in 2 weeks, but how is the network developed and maintained? Many discussions about the importance of natural supports, as well as eligibility related supports, and how can we make sure those are in place for all families. I think one of the other key pieces is the need, as I mentioned before, for adaptive supports, supports that make sense for that person and are coming from where they are at. I think of the Einstein quote, if you ask a fish to climb a tree, they will fail every time. And so we want to make sure that we're not setting our parents up to fail, but giving them the strategies to be as successful as possible. Next. The need for safety and security for children. Of course, this is at the essence of all work with families, and something that's very important to touch on as we go through the research. Showing parents with disabilities are overrepresented in the child welfare system. Parents with intellectual disabilities held up against people living with the same number of risk factors. Of course, they don't look the same, because not only do they have all those other risk factors, but they also learn a little bit differently. The research also points to why are children removed? Are they removed because they're in imminent harm and because we know something is going to happen or something has already happened? Or are we just worried that because they have a disability or there's some casual explanation that children are not safe there? For this, I think about a mom that I supported who thought that her daughter would be born with clothes on. And this was one of the reasons that her daughter was removed from the hospital. Was that really something dangerous? Probably not, just shows her lack of understanding. And so maybe with some education, she would be able to parent that child and the children that were to come after. There is no documentation that says that there is a specific timeline. I know that in Massachusetts, we've moved to much quicker timelines to ensure that kids don't live in care for a significant amount of time. But again, going back to that supported parenting that we talked about a little bit earlier. They do talk about having adoptive parents in the pipelines for children, and sometimes how that can muddy the waters, because an adoptive parent may want to have that person become a member of their family, and the parent with intellectual disabilities is just not learning quick enough. The research states that the best interest of the child is what's important, regardless of the parent's ability. And then I commend everybody who's involved in the partnership with DDS and DCF. The research in 2012 speaks to that as well, and the importance of the disability service system and the child welfare system working together. As you can see by our examples today, some of that is happening in Massachusetts. And so that's great to see. And again, supported by the research that we have. They did some research on the emotional, psychological, and abuse and neglect of children with parents with intellectual disabilities, and they did not find that there was any correlation with the disability and the form of abuse. They did find that parents with intellectual disabilities may judge their children a little bit more negatively, or their behavior a little bit more negatively, and take it personal. But that was all that they were able to find. Again, stating that an IQ is not a predictive power on parenting. The research states to the importance of observation and observation checklists. Betsy's going to talk more about the curriculum by Maureen Feldman, but there's a step-by-step guide. And I worked with a parent who was not very engaged and was really having trouble, but really, really wanted to be successful. And when she could see herself moving from needing 3 prompts from needing 5 prompts, she was able to see that sense of accomplishment and see that she was making progress and take pride in that and pride in her daughter. The last thing that I will leave everybody with is just the need for more training and longitudinal studies for parents with intellectual disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula. As Paula stated, the current research, an individual's ability to parent is greatly enhanced with resources, supports, and training. It also indicated and reinforced that IQ is not the only determining factor in whether or not an individual can have the capacity to parent. Research actually has demonstrated that it's not until the IQ becomes 50 or below that it is definitely a determining factor. This reminds me of one of the families that I worked with many, many years ago. During our first meeting, when I arrived at the home, the 14-year-old son and the dad were in the kitchen, and the son was helping the dad look something up in the yellow pages of the phone book. So that tells you how long ago it was. I observed their relationship as a loving, mutually respectful, natural interactions between them both. That young man went on to graduate from high school with MCAS scores that were so high, he received a 4-year paid tuition to a Massachusetts state college. He then went on to get his master's. All this by being raised by parents with learning disabilities that receive supports during their parenting journey. Our last topic is strategies, presented by Betsy Misch, Program Manager for the United Arc Positive Parenting Program. Within her program, she promotes community collaborations, trainings, advocacy, outreach, positive working relationships with all of the DCF offices where programs provide services for. Betsy?
Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be speaking with you today. My poll question is, what type of strategies have you used in your work that you have found effective with this population? As Sue Jones mentioned, my name is Betsy Misch, and I'm the Program Manager of the United Arc out of our Holyoke office. I also sit on the board of the Association for Successful Parenting, or TASP. Our program provides in-home parent education and supervised visitation services through our contract with the Department of Children and Families. We also provide parenting groups through a Children's Trust grant and funding from the Department of Disability Services in Holyoke. Prior to my current role, I was working as a parent educator. Being on the front line provided me a lot of information that I continue to draw upon in my current role. While our program focuses on parent education and parents specifically, we do work with the entire family. From teaching parents about child development, to assisting with resources and service acquisition, to attending IEP meetings. We always view our work as family support work. The parents and families we serve are from diverse cultures and backgrounds, as well as diverse gender identities. Unfortunately, most of the families we serve are similar in one particular challenging way. Most of the families we work with are living in poverty or extreme poverty. So when Paula mentioned that there are external factors that often come into play, poverty is certainly one of the biggest factors we see. Today I'm going to talk about some of the strategies that we use at the United Arc when working with families. According to the report, Rocking the Cradle, there are 4 main points that contribute to successful services for parents living with an intellectual or developmental disability. This can also be applied to parents living with executive functioning challenges. I'll go through each point with an emphasis on concrete frontline strategies. You can go ahead and move the slide, Carrie, thank you. Services need to be responsive to the parent's individual needs and focus on the whole family to ensure that the interest of both the parents and the children are served. You can go ahead and advance the slide. Relationship building is a core tenet of this work. One of the ways in which our program seeks to build relationships is through engaging families in their own treatment. Obviously, parents have to buy into the service, so we aim to make sure that their voices are elevated and heard. We do this first by focusing on the goals that a parent may want to acquire or learn before focusing on the have-to goals, such as goals from a family's action plan. This assists with engendering trust and lets the family know that we are not just in their home to tell them what to do, but to offer a caring, supportive services that engages the family in their own growth. By asking families and parents how they want to use the service, we are building the relationship as well as selling the service by letting the parents know that there are personal benefits to engagement. Once a strong relationship has begun, we can then begin to work on harder goals or goals that may be of a more personal nature, such as budgeting or hygiene. While budgeting is not always viewed as a personal or sensitive goal, I always think about goals in relationship to myself. Who would I be comfortable sharing all my bills or expenses with? Then I think about sharing that information with a virtual stranger and how stressful that might be. In our program, we really try to put ourselves in the parents' shoes and view the world from their perspective. In terms of applying the service to the whole family, it becomes our job to invest not only in the parent's goal, but also the goals of the children and extended family members. We find resources and services for the whole family, such as family therapy, couples counseling, co-parenting resources, insurance for the entire family, and income. Summer camps and youth employment are also encouraged as they enhance the child's community connections and exposure. Engagement with the whole family can impact positive change above and beyond just one individual family member. A family is stronger when all members are involved in positive change. We also often encourage and engage in mediation with neighbors and extended family who can be great supports. By strengthening the relationship between extended family members when possible, assist the family and parents in developing their natural support network. Research shows that when parents living with ID or DD have support from their extended families, the better chance the parent has at maintaining custody of their child or children. We also need to consider timing. Parents and individuals living with an intellectual or developmental disability may need more time for skill acquisition. This means that staff have to be prepared for slow, incremental changes. Be a cheerleader for small successes and build from there. Be patient. Change takes time. Next slide, Carrie, please. The second point is that services must consider the special learning needs of the parent. Learning must be in the home and include repetition, demonstration, and resources that require little or no reading. You can advance the slide. At Positive Parenting, we often use a learning styles assessment to figure out what type of instruction will be most effective. Then we tailor our teaching and materials. One note about curriculum that Paula mentioned earlier is that there are curriculum for this population, but there are very few. Maurice Feldman, a Canadian researcher from Brock University, has a few curricula, and they're great because they're focused on visuals, but they're also for young children. The same is true for the health and wellness curriculum by Alexander Timchuk. We often have to modify existing curricula to meet the needs of our parents. We aim to use evidence-based curriculum if available, but we also use a lot of handouts retrieved from online, such as budgeting sheets and information related to child development from places such as the Academy of Pediatrics and the CDC. Parents living with ID or DD or experiencing an executive functioning challenge often have trouble translating information from one setting to another. A skill learned in a parenting group may not easily be translated by the parent into their own home or particular situation. This makes one-on-one in-home services so critical. It is our job to demonstrate to parents how skills learned directly apply to them in their current living situation. The more times we are able to show a parent how to do something in the environment that the skill is applied, the better chance the parent has to form a habit. As science tells us, it takes repeating something 21 times before it's a habit. For our parents, it may take longer. So don't give up, keep trying. Next slide, Carrie. Point 3 is that services must assist parents to become members of their own community. According to the 5 protective factors, constructive and supportive social connections help buffer parents from stresses and support nurturing parenting behaviors that promote secure attachments in young children. Therefore, parents' high-quality social connections are beneficial to both the adults and the children. This is the "it takes a village" philosophy. I don't know about others, but I never parented alone. I had my parents, my siblings, my husband, parent support groups, neighbors, a whole group of people that I could call on if I was having a bad day and needed to vent, or if I needed a break. Many of the parents we serve do not know where to turn for support. We must assist them in building their communities. This includes formal and informal supports, including playgroups, building and strengthening relationships with extended families, friends, neighbors, paid resources and services such as early intervention, Head Start, and many of the agencies represented on this Zoom call. In order for our parents to be successful members of their community, the community must also make accommodations when it comes to persons living with disabilities. Many state agencies have laws that require them to make accommodations, such as sending documents in the person's native language or providing an interpreter if needed. In the case of our parents, these agencies have to be able to accommodate individuals that have challenges around an intellectual disability, such as low literacy skills. We advocate, when appropriate, that agencies do not mail forms, or if they do, that a person from the agency follows up with the parent to ensure that the parent understands what's being asked of them. It is not enough to mail a form that says, please provide the agency with X, Y, and Z if the person receiving this information does not understand what the document says. We've seen this over and over with Mass Health, renewals for SNAP, TAFDC, and housing. I personally think the majority of the work we do is related to being a liaison between parents and the service sector by assisting with the myriad of documents they receive. This is an area where I think the state could take a look at families receiving state services and streamline the process somehow. The training for us becomes to figure out if an accommodation can be found, and then to reinforce the use of the accommodation or adaptation by both the parent and the community. This includes supporting parents to become their own advocates so they can be successful when we are no longer in their lives. The fourth point, and Carrie, if you want to advance the slide, please, is that services must include long-term, ongoing supports because the needs of children and parenting skills must change as children mature. If supports are to be long-term, the subject of staff burnout and stress must be addressed. How can staff provide ongoing, long-term support if they are too overwhelmed to take care of themselves? The human service field is inherently a helping field. We help others make positive change in their lives, but we cannot do this if we are not supported in our roles. Training staff on the impact of trauma can assist with self-care and help prevent burnout. It not only reframes the discussion of what is wrong with you to one of what may have happened to you. It also assists staff with the ability to process some of their own trauma and become more aware of secondary trauma in their work. It is essential for agencies, programs, and supervisors to become occupied with self-care, as this improves the quality of service and can reduce turnover. This is especially important in terms of building supportive relationships with our families. If agencies have large turnover, it can create stress and more trauma for the families, as well as a disruption in services. If families must engage with new service providers on a regular basis, trust is sacrificed. If trust is not present, families may be unwilling to share sensitive information or disclose abuse. Supporting staff supports our families. So in summary, and remember, this is just a basic overview with more to come in session 2 with how to apply these skills into your work. We're going to say, focus on relationship building, be family-centered, connect families to their communities, and take time for self-care. Remember, change takes time, but change can happen. The last part of the presentation is a video of the Thornton family. Susan Jones and I met this family many years ago in Washington, D.C. when they were slated to speak at one of the conferences we were attending. They are gracious and caring individuals who are strong parents and strong members of their community. What is not mentioned in this video is that the family has had a support worker that stayed with them for the entirety of their parenting journey and still maintains their close relationship to this day. They have one child. He was never removed from their parents' care. I will also mention that this parent is, while this family may be famous, quote unquote, they faced similar struggles as the parents we serve every day, from poverty to discrimination, yet with consistent support and obviously a lot of personal drive, they were successful. Thank you. Seem to be having a little trouble with the video.
This technology has transformed everything. When you empower the kids, it allows them to see themselves in a multitude of ways that weren't there before.
Those are my grandkids. That's my son. And that's my wife. She's spicy, but she's nice. And that's me, Ricardo. And this is a life no one thought I could have. Forest Haven was an institution for many of us with developmental disabilities. Everyone that came here went through a court process. It was a process, I think it was called commitment. Many came in not knowing we're clothes. They figured just let them stay naked or wear pajamas. That was their way of working with us.
It was difficult for the people working there. They were not trained in helping the individual become more helpful to themselves.
I will never forget, as a young graduate student, I took a walk around the grounds at Forest Haven, and I walked up to this chain link fence, and I watched a staff person bring out about 20 women who were completely naked, and then watched that person hose them down.
Hose down is not unusual. You would see them, they sit there, they have a towel set over a chair, and they sprinkle them with the hose.
It was the most dehumanizing experience I think I've ever seen, and maybe ever since.
There's a lot of bodies here that are laid to rest in peace. On that side there, we used to see them and drop a set of bodies down. We had to be pallbearers. Those are sacrifices you make. And then down here is where my sister Earlene is buried. She had her good days and she had bad days. She had days that were very dark that she wouldn't tell a lot of people. She passed in one of the cottages, and they said she had had a heart attack. I don't think it was a heart attack. I think that it was something else they didn't want me to really know. I know a couple of times when I seen her, she was drugged up to the point where she couldn't even touch her legs. The medicine was just that bad. There was no investigation. There's no one to tell. There's no one to say the psychologist made a big mistake. They drugged her, but I couldn't say that because I didn't know. But I was very sad at that, and I said I would advocate for change. That won't happen to anyone else. I was exposed to Special Olympics in 1971. I was doing track and field, and I was fast. I was good.
Special Olympics helped him become part of a community because he was associating with people who were not from the institution.
Love Special Olympics. And the reason why I love it, it didn't give me about my disability. It just gave me my ability to do the best I can. And I got my first gold medal. Awesome. Took it back to Forest Haven.
He did learn a lot from Special Olympics, but he also wanted it. He wanted to change.
A lot of people was talking about Ricardo, and I said to myself, oh, that's Ricardo Thornton. I said, wow, he's nice looking. And I said to myself, I'm gonna keep my eye on him.
Donna, oh, she's so spicy. When she proposed to me, I told her, I said, we're gonna talk to our social workers and see what they say.
There were questions as to whether two people who had been diagnosed with a cognitive disability should be permitted to be married, mostly because they had been to Forest Haven.
They were talking, bashing group homes, bashing institutions, bashing people with disability. And what I did was I testified, and I gave my best testifying down there. I told my story and invited them to come out to a handicap wedding. Come to the wedding. Come see what we can do. And what I loved about the wedding was that we had people with disabilities in the wedding.
Their marriage and the success of their marriage has been a major factor in helping people understand that folks should be given opportunities. And along the way, like everybody, they've had their challenges.
So we challenged getting married, having children, having a car, doing everything a normal person has.
They are profoundly normal. The things that they do are the things that everybody else takes for granted.
They changed the lives of many people by the way that they changed their own lives.
I want people to know that my past is that I lived in institution. The only thing different about Forest Haven and being in a jail is that we don't have bars. It's just that we were able to grow and develop some skills to help us. Special Olympics had an oath, and their oath is to let me win. But if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt. And I think showing my bravery.
I think the video was cut off a little bit. You can search them on YouTube. There's some wonderful videos. They have a couple of other videos around parenting and other conferences they've been to. So they're an interesting family to look up. Thank you all for today.
Thank you, Betsy. I also wanted to add that earlier, Betsy mentioned the Association for Successful Parenting. The Thorntons have been a keynoter for that conference, and they've also been a keynoter for one of the Chance to Parent conferences that we've done before. And their live story was based on a movie called Profoundly Normal that was out several years ago, and Christy Alley actually played Donna. The other thing I think Betsy and I will agree on, they're just like they are in this clip here. Very funny, very affectionate, very, very nice people. We're about to wrap up our one portion of this. I just wanted to mention that when we were preparing, the presenters and myself were preparing for this, we had some conversations and talked about some mutual lessons that we had learned over our years of providing services to families. And some of the examples of those lessons are, some of parents may not identify themselves as having a disability and may try to hide that. They may have difficulty with organizing and completing tasks, as Betsy had mentioned, and time management, which may result in missed meetings, being late, misplacing paperwork or not even filling out paperwork. And that might be being seen as non-compliant instead of what it really is functioning issues. May not be able to read or may have difficulty reading, and again, may not disclose that. May not in agreement, but not necessarily understand what is being said to them. It's very important to confirm it is understood. One of the techniques that I have sometimes used, if I'm explaining something or reading something to an individual and I'm not sure they're fully understanding what I'm saying, I may say to them, could you repeat back what I just said to you? I'm not sure if I explained that clearly to you. And that way they can say it back to me and I have an understanding that they understood and heard what was being said. It's important to try different approaches. Ask questions. Don't assume. Repeat and review. If folks aren't getting it, look at what you can do differently. Ask questions. How can I help you? How can I best help you learn this? So that's the end of this part of our presentation. We are now going to be moving on to our question and answers. Before we do that, Carrie, I didn't know if there was any of comments that you wanted to mention on the strategies for the question that Betsy asked.
We had just a few. Actually, it posed more questions. So I'll just jump in. Nancy was wondering how, she has a question. How do you get the parents to buy into the services when they want us to be the ones to fix things, and then they say yes to everything you say, but they don't follow through?
So I did reply to Nancy. I mean, I think, you know, obviously these are complex families we're working with and complex situations, but I think that I would start with maybe working on really small goals, like I said, things that the family can accomplish and see success with. I think Paula alluded to that too. Part of the Maurice Feldman step-by-step curriculum is, it's kind of like a checklist, right, Paula? And it kind of allows the family to see in a visual way the goals that they have met. And sometimes that's helpful. If folks are more visual, then I think writing stuff out, quote unquote, but making maybe a chart of goals that the family has been successful, or maybe making you know, a list or a visual list of some of the things that the family has accomplished in the past. And
can I say something? I'm Nancy. I don't know if you can see me or not, but hi. I don't know how this all works, but So we've done that. I've been working with this family for about a year and a half now. We make the visuals. We keep things small. We've done all these things, and I think this is what enticed me so to this webinar, and I'm so thankful for it. And it just seems that like the charts get misplaced after we leave, and there's absolutely no follow through. But then I stay in touch with them all week, even though I only technically see them once a week. And I'm getting, yes, we did that, but it's not done. So and I think she almost forgets everything too. So I don't know. I so want to help them move forward, and she looks at me as the fixer, like.
Well, certainly one of the things that we definitely do is let's say the family has to call Mass Health because there's a problem with Mass Health. We would actually be on the call with the family. So we wouldn't say call Mass Health, because we know as well as many other people that doesn't always happen. So we do a lot of hand holding, maybe a year's worth of hand holding. And I think when we talk about slow acquisition of skills, this is what we're talking about. And I think we also have to remember, and I didn't mention this, is that an intellectual disability is not going to ever go away, right? That's a permanent thing for families. So I think that at the end of the day, we have to figure out what skills can families acquire with training, what skills are they always going to struggle with, and is there kind of an adaptive technology or an adaptive service that can be put in there to assist with those things that the family may struggle with, and on a slightly less positive note, I mean, just like all typically functioning families, right? Not all of our families are going to be successful, right?
No, I agree. I just was wondering if, just because I know I'm meeting with her today too, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to take some of these strategies and go for it. So I was just looking for that. But no, this is all helpful, so thank you.
One other thing that I might just add is sometimes, when people are trying to say, well, I need you to do it, I need you to do it, this will build on the success, kind of similar to what Betsy was saying. And, and I'll say my job is to make you the best parent that you possibly can be. Nobody cares what, people aren't as concerned of what I'm doing. They're concerned about what you're doing. And I'm just here to help you, and so asking them, and also like, how did you learn best when you were in school? What's helpful for you? Because some people love a paper calendar. Some people keep the calendar on their phone. Just like all of us, different strategies work for different people.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you.
One more thing, it might be helpful with families if you can bring like perhaps a notebook that all your sheets have to go into, or a box, so things can hopefully go into a specific area so they just don't get left on the table and then get moved and then get misplaced. So that might be another area that might be.
I did that twice, and twice they were lost. But that is a great idea. I thought it was a good idea at the time too.
Hi, my name is Danielle Barad. I work in the family support as well. Nancy, I know you know who I am. I also have families that I support all the time, and one of my biggest things, what I do is it's a friendly reminder the day of, as I do for myself in my own calendar. It's true, they need that constant support sometimes, and what I had instant private message Nancy is that what I feel is that giving them the heads up prior to is very helpful. Getting them into a structured pattern where it becomes a routine for them, I see can be very beneficial, along with reminding them that, they're driving the bus, you're in the back seat, really empowering what you had said as well, Paula, as well too, that basically, showing them they can do it, but getting them into a good structured routine is really imperative as well with the families we support. And do they at times come off track? Absolutely. So what I do is I check in to make sure they're following through. And like you said, like sometimes it is the conference call with them on the phone with you, getting them just comfortable enough with doing that pattern where they actually will do it eventually on their own because they feel that comfortable doing it, and then they can take off. And even then you still check in, but, obviously you hold them accountable, meaning not pressuring them, but like, you know, a friendly reminder, like you know, we all need that sometimes. And then, you know, slowly like take the training wheels off the bike.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think a great idea, just quickly, as far as, my name is Raina, by the way, I'm part of the Healthy Families program in Southbridge, but as a visual reminder for these individuals could be something like printing out some pictures of the process that you want them to complete, laminating them, and putting them up somewhere, if it's okay with them, that help them see the process visually, and to have a reminder in that way of the specific process that they might be having a hard time completing.
We've done all those things too.
Just keep trying. You'll hit one that works. Just keep trying.
Yeah, that's all. We just gotta, you know, and I think just even coming to this, it just gives me the support and the you know, energy to keep going, because we're all in this together, and
right,
you know, so that's a big takeaway for me, at least. And I thank you all. I really do. I don't know who said that I know who they are, but I don't know who you are. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that is one of.
We work in the same agency. I'm sorry.
We work in the same agency?
I thought so.
Oh, I don't know. Are you with the Brockton Arc?
No. So mistake, sorry.
Nope, that's okay. Because I'm like, no, I don't think I do know that lady. That's okay, no problem.
Well, you just learned. You just met her. So it's all good.
Yeah, so nice to meet you.
Margaret
had
a question around, can we talk more about the learning styles assessment we do, and how to use this to plan approaches? I don't know if you want to take it, Sue, or I'll take it.
No, go ahead, Bets.
Yeah, I mean, our learning styles assessment is super simple. I think it's 10 questions. And it's actually useful in a way that I didn't mention, and that's assessing literacy skills, right? Mm-hmm. So when we go into the family, we'll say, oh, we have this little, you know, quick quiz around how you learn best, whether it's visual or written, or kinesthetic. There's and then the other one I'm forgetting right now, but we'll ask the parent, do you want to read it and fill it out yourself? Do you want us to read it to you? And that sometimes can give us an idea whether a parent feels comfortable reading and kind of answering simple questions. And then, you know, we take that. So if a family learns kinesthetically, I got to say that's probably a little bit challenging, but that just means more hands-on. So that means, you know, helping the parent or reminding the parent, okay, it's timeout time. So go over, pick up the child, bring the child to timeout. That's how the parent learns versus, you know, maybe giving them the 1, 2, 3 magic, have a little short PDF that talks about it. So parents who have more literacy or more follow through, we can give them the handout and kind of monitor success that way. For families with lower literacy or who learn in different ways, it's more hands-on and more visual cues and reminders.
And modeling, I would say as well.
And modeling, yep. All right, I'm just going to keep going. Thanks, Paula. The CDC app, that's awesome. Some of our families use that too. Cutoff for these types of services. So for the United Arc, we have no criteria for engagement with service. We did that intentionally to be able to catch some folks that do not qualify for DDS services. So our criteria is basically based on referrals from social workers. So we'll have a social worker that says, I think this family might be struggling with some organization or may have a disability, and then they just send it over. So our program does not have criteria. I don't know, Paul, if you want to talk about your program.
Yeah, it's very similar. We have a social work referral from Family Networks for the successful parenting work through DCF. And then our criteria is just you know, that they've tried other services and they haven't been successful, and there's either some document or some understanding by the social worker that they have an intellectual disability. I think that we are really good at working with parents with intellectual disabilities, and sometimes we'll get referrals for people who have very significant mental health issues or significant substance abuse issues, and we just don't see that as our strength. So we, you know, we stick with the parents with intellectual disabilities, or maybe we'll ask somebody if, did you have an IEP in school, or ask a social worker to ask that, just to kind of get an understanding of where they're coming from. And then for the DDS side of our work, similar to the United ARC, the parents that we support in that way, often we've supported, we support their children, and they have their own adult service coordinators. So we just all work together, kind of that team approach that takes a village, like Betsy mentioned.
We're very fortunate, and very recently our Department of Developmental Services is starting to give us referrals of individuals that receive DDS services, parents, and we're starting to do parent education groups, which is wonderful, as long as it is supporting also our work for the Children's Trust. One of the things that I think is very important is that we are an agency that can provide services for folks that may be in that sort of gray area. And social workers will be able to, you know, make the referrals. Usually after we've been working with the families, though, we have some time, can sort of see where there is some type of a disability, though it may not be formally diagnosed.
There was a question by Kathy. Are there programs in the greater New Bedford area similar to the one in Holyoke?
I would like to see if Margaret Van Gelder could maybe answer that. Margaret?
I just unmuted myself. Thanks, Sue. So, you know, actually part of the impetus of kind of coming together is really to create a stronger network, as Sue said at the beginning, to really look at the needs and what are the different resources and services and supports. And it does really require a partnership across state agency. And so we both want to look at within DDS, how do we develop more and better supports for parents, individuals who are parenting who also have an intellectual or developmental disability. And then how do we partner with our sister agencies at DCF and work with Children's Trust? So it really seems to me that a big part of both the United ARC and the Positive Parenting Center and Communitas's positive experiences is really because they've been able to leverage and really combine and work collaboratively across the two systems. So what we find in DDS is that there are some of our providers through our intensive flexible family support program, regular family support programs, and some of our individual support programs who are working with adults who are engaged in this work. So we would love to be able to build more capacity across the state to kind of have a more organized network, to have a more comprehensive set of services like the United ARC is able to offer through their Positive Parenting Center. And we really want to look at sort of where some of those gaps are. But I think also in responding to Nancy's comment earlier about feeling supported by being on this call is that we really, I think, want to create more of a network of people doing this work. People can learn from and with each other, feel supported in the work, and so that we can also look at how can we be a little more strategic moving forward. You know, to be honest, we don't have a really good understanding of what the overall numbers are. And that's an area we really want to understand better, but we believe that it's only going to grow as people have more inclusive lives out in the community and have opportunities and want the things everyone else does. So it's really how do we use existing supports and think about what other different supports and how do we tap into kind of the years of experience and expertise among providers across these different systems so that we can, it really is a matter of sort of weaving some of this together to make it really work on behalf of families. And how do we do this over the long term, I think is, as was raised. So I guess, Kathy, I don't know that there's a specific program in the Southeast, but that would be great for us to have that conversation and see how we could get something kind of going both on the DCF and DDS side in that area.
Thank you, Margaret.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Not at this point? All right, then I guess that's going to conclude part one. Again, we have our other sessions going to be happening on June 25th. And I want to thank everyone who attended today, our presenters, the statewide partnership. And I just also wanted to mention, as the statewide partnership for supporting parents with intellectual and developmental disabilities becomes more active, we'll be letting folks know how they will be able to participate and also of any upcoming events. I want to thank you all for attending. Again, thank our presenters, and goodbye and good afternoon. And you have our email addresses. It was on one of the slides, and I believe Carrie mentioned you will be getting the PowerPoint and any handouts as well. And feel free to reach out to any one of us if you have come up with any additional questions or are looking for some support. Really appreciate you all attending and listening to us. We're very happy to share our experiences, our stories, our lessons, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. So thank you.
Great job, everyone.
Thank you so much, Margaret.
Thank you.